Yo, remember that time Trump tried to solve the Israel-Palestine conflict like it was a game of Risk? It was one of those moments where you had to do a double take and ask, is this for real? The idea was so outlandish that it felt like it belonged in a satirical comedy rather than real-world politics. His big idea? Resettle Palestinians in Jordan and Egypt. Just imagine the logistics of that. We're talking about uprooting entire communities, families, and generations of people who have deep-rooted connections to their land. Yeah, you heard that right. Just pack up millions of people and ship them off to neighboring countries. It's not like moving a few pieces on a board game. These are real lives, real homes, and real histories we're talking about. Not exactly a recipe for peace and harmony, right? The idea sparked outrage and protests, as it completely disregarded the human element and the complex socio-political dynamics of the region. Trump figured this would be a win-win. Israel gets more land, and the Palestinian problem magically disappears. But the reality is far from that simplistic. The land disputes in the Middle East are deeply entrenched and can't be solved by just redrawing borders. But there was just one tiny issue. Jordan and Egypt weren't exactly thrilled about the idea. They have their own political, economic, and social challenges to deal with, and adding millions of new citizens wasn't on their agenda. Imagine their surprise when they found out they were suddenly responsible for millions of new citizens. The logistical nightmare, the strain on resources, and the potential for social unrest were just a few of the many concerns. Trump's plan was dead on arrival. It was met with widespread criticism and was quickly shelved. The whole episode highlighted the gap between political rhetoric and the harsh realities on the ground. It showed a complete lack of understanding of the region's history, the complexities of the conflict, and the basic principles of, international law. The Middle East conflict is a deeply rooted issue that requires nuanced, informed, and empathetic approaches, not simplistic game-like solutions. To understand why Jordan and Egypt weren't down with Trump's plan, we gotta rewind the clock a bit. The history of the Palestinian people is deeply intertwined with the broader Middle Eastern conflict, and it's essential to grasp this context to understand the present-day dynamics. The Palestinian story is one of displacement, starting with the creation of Israel in 1948. This event, known as the Nakba or catastrophe in Arabic, saw the forced exodus of over 700,000 Palestinian Arabs from their homes. The establishment of Israel was a pivotal moment that reshaped the region's demographics and set the stage for decades of conflict. Hundreds of thousands of Palestinians were forced from their homes, becoming refugees in neighboring countries. These refugees settled in camps in Jordan, Lebanon, Syria, and other parts of the Middle East, often living in dire conditions. The loss of their homeland and the struggle to survive in foreign lands became a defining aspect of the Palestinian identity. Fast forward to 1967, and another war leads to even more Palestinians being displaced. The Six-Day War resulted in Israel capturing the West Bank, Gaza Strip, and East Jerusalem, territories that were home to a significant Palestinian population. This war not only altered the map, but also intensified the Palestinian refugee crisis. The West Bank and Gaza Strip, territories captured by Israel, became home to a growing Palestinian population living under Israeli occupation. The daily lives of Palestinians in these areas were marked by military checkpoints, restricted movement, and economic hardships. The occupation has been a source of ongoing tension and conflict, affecting generations of Palestinians. This history of displacement is crucial. It's not just a series of events, but a continuous narrative of loss, resilience, and the quest for justice. The displacement has fragmented Palestinian society, scattering families across different countries and creating a diaspora that still longs for a return to their ancestral lands. It's at the heart of the Palestinian identity and their struggle for self-determination. The right to return, the desire for an independent state, and the fight against occupation are central to the Palestinian cause. These aspirations are reflected in the protests, the political movements, and the everyday resistance of the Palestinian people. So, when Trump casually suggests uprooting them again, it's not just insensitive, it's ignoring decades of pain, loss, and injustice. His plan, seen by many as one-sided, fails to address the historical grievances and the legitimate aspirations of the Palestinian people. It's a reminder that any peace plan must consider the deep-rooted history and the enduring spirit of a people who have faced unimaginable hardships. Today, millions of Palestinians live as refugees, scattered across various regions of the world. Their plight began in 1948, during the Nakba, when hundreds of thousands were forced to flee their homes. Some reside in overcrowded camps, where living conditions are dire and resources are scarce. These camps, initially meant to be temporary, have become permanent settlements for many. While others have tried to rebuild their lives in Jordan, Lebanon, and other countries, they often face legal and social challenges. Many are denied citizenship and basic rights, living in a state of limbo. Life as a refugee is tough. Access to education, healthcare, and employment is limited. Refugees often rely on aid from organizations like UNRWA to meet their basic needs. Limited opportunities, poverty, and discrimination are everyday realities. Many refugees live below the poverty line, struggling to make ends meet.
Imagine being told you can't go back home and now someone wants to ship you off to another country. The uncertainty and lack of control over their own lives is a constant source of stress and anxiety for Palestinian refugees. That's the reality for Palestinians. They are caught in a cycle of displacement and marginalization, with no clear path to a stable future. We are caught in a political tug-of-war, where our voices are often drowned out by the interests of more powerful nations. The international community has yet to find a lasting solution. Our fate is held hostage to the whims of global powers. Diplomatic efforts have been inconsistent, and peace talks have repeatedly stalled.
The resettlement plan ignores the root cause of the problem, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict itself. Without addressing the core issues, any solution will be incomplete. Instead of addressing the occupation and the need for a just solution, the current approach tries to erase the Palestinian presence altogether. This only perpetuates the cycle of suffering and displacement. The international community must recognize the rights of Palestinian refugees and work towards a fair and lasting resolution. Only then can we hope for a future where Palestinians can live in peace and dignity. Trump's plan went about as well as you'd expect. Jordan and Egypt, both key U.S. allies in the region, flat out rejected it. They weren't about to become dumping grounds for a problem they didn't create.
King Abdullah II of Jordan was blunt, saying, "The Palestinian cause is a red line." He knew accepting the plan would be political suicide, destabilizing his own country and the entire region.
Egypt's President El-Sisi echoed those sentiments, emphasizing the need for a two-state solution and the rights of Palestinians.
Both leaders understood that true stability in the Middle East couldn't be achieved by simply relocating the Palestinian people. Section 5. Security First, Jordan and Egypt's Concerns. Jordan and Egypt had every right to be worried. Absorbing millions of Palestinians would strain their resources, economies, and social fabric. But their concerns went beyond logistics. Both countries share borders with Israel and the Palestinian territories. They know firsthand the volatility of the conflict. Flooding their countries with resentful and displaced Palestinians would be a security nightmare, potentially fueling extremism and instability. Imagine the pressure on their governments, already grappling with their own internal challenges. The last thing they needed was to import another conflict, especially one as intractable as the Israeli-Palestinian one. Section 6. Political Suicide. The Arab Street rejects resettlement. Beyond the practical concerns, the resettlement plan was a non-starter politically. The Arab world, already outraged by Trump's pro-Israel policies, would have erupted. The Palestinian cause resonates deeply across the Middle East. Forcing Palestinians into another exile would be seen as a betrayal, fueling anti-Western sentiment and bolstering extremist groups. It's a recipe for chaos, not peace. Leaders like King Abdullah and President El-Sisi know their people. They understand the pulse of the Arab Street. Agreeing to Trump's plan would have meant risking their own legitimacy and potentially sparking unrest at home. Section 7. Israel's endgame: cementing control through resettlement. Now let's talk about Israel's perspective. Why would they support a plan like this? Well, from their point of view, resettling Palestinians kills two birds with one stone.
First, it gets rid of a population they view as an obstacle to their control over the West Bank. Less Palestinians mean more land for settlements, making it harder to establish a viable Palestinian state. Second, it shifts the narrative. By framing the conflict as a humanitarian issue, Israel tries to deflect from its occupation and responsibility for the Palestinian refugee crisis. It's a classic case of blaming the victim.
Section 8. A recipe for disaster resettlement and the peace process. Trump's resettlement plan wasn't just disrespectful, it was dangerous. It undermined any hope for a negotiated two-state solution, the only viable path to peace. Imagine you're trying to negotiate a peace deal, and one side is trying to eliminate the other side's presence entirely. That's not exactly conducive to dialogue, is it? The plan further alienated Palestinians, making them even more distrustful of any US-led peace efforts. It also emboldened hardliners on both sides, those who benefit from the status quo of conflict and occupation. Section 9. No easy answers. The future of Palestinian resettlement. The debate over Palestinian resettlement is a microcosm of the larger Israeli-Palestinian conflict, complex, emotional, and seemingly intractable. There are no easy answers, no quick fixes. But one thing's for sure. Trump's plan was a non-starter. It was a recipe for disaster, and thankfully, wiser heads prevailed. The only way forward is through dialogue, compromise, and a recognition of the humanity and rights of both Palestinians and Israelis. Until then, the cycle of conflict and suffering will continue.